The rain felt like a wall when I got to the castle gates. I stumbled into the stone archway, out of breath. And that's when I saw him. A huge man, the Alpha King, Kalen Thorn, he was already standing there. His eyes were glowing a pale gold in the dark. I froze. My hand started to shake from the cold and from the shock. His scent hit me. It cut right through the wet stone and my own fear. It smelled like pine needles and a banked campfire. My chest got tight and weirdly warm. I took a shaky step back, right back into the rain. The wind whipped my hair across my face. I knew I was trespassing. Everything about him screamed danger. I was soaked to the bone, shivering so hard my teeth chattered. "Please," I whispered. The storm almost drowned out my voice. "The storm is too strong out there." I wrapped my arms around myself. Water dripped from my chin onto the stone floor. He growled. It was a low sound that vibrated right through me. His order was clear. "Leave," but he didn't move to make me go. He just stood there, a solid wall between me and the storm outside. I looked from his scarred face to the black night behind me. I wondered if he would actually throw me out. His right hand flexed at his side, then closed into a fist. And I thought, why hasn't he thrown me out already? I had a bad feeling I wasn't going to like the answer. The ghost of his grip still pulsed around my wrist like a bruise. I was alone in a tower room, cold and damp. That's when I finally heard it, the thin, rhythmic shriek of a loose shutter banging against the stone. Kalen Thorn stood across the room. He'd locked the heavy door after bringing me here. His scent, pine and cold earth, filled the small space. It made the air hard to breathe. He braced his hands against a rough wooden table. His shoulders were rigid. I watched his back, waiting for the next command, the next threat. The silence was worse than shouting. It was full of what had happened at the gates. My skin still remembered the shock of his touch. Then I saw his hand on the table. His fingers were spread wide, pressing down. They weren't still. A fine tremor ran through them. It wasn't from anger. I knew what his anger looked like. This was different. He took a slow, deep breath. His ribs expanded. He held it. When he let it out, his whole body softened for just 1 second. It was a crack in his stone wall. I didn't move. I just watched that small piece of him break. "This bond," I said. My voice was rough from the cold. "It hurts you too." It wasn't really a question. He didn't look at me. He stared at the wall like it had answers. His jaw worked. Then he gave one short, sharp nod. It was an honest answer he didn't mean to give. He brought a hand up to his chest. He rubbed the spot over his heart with his knuckles just once. Then he dropped his arm like he'd been burned. I understood then. The pull I felt toward him, that warm ache, it went both ways. The way he'd looked at me just then, it wasn't about the threat. I didn't know what to do with that. He turned from the table. He moved across the room toward me. He stopped when he was close enough that I could feel the heat coming off him, our breath mixed in the cold air. I could see the gold flecks in his eyes. He looked down at me. His hand lifted just a little from his side. I didn't step back. I held my ground. A sharp pain throbbed in my chest, a reminder of the danger I was in. He didn't close the distance. He let his hand fall. A muscle in his cheek jumped. He looked from my eyes to my mouth and back again. The moment stretched, heavy with everything we didn't say. Then he turned away. He went to a chest by the wall and pulled out a thick wool blanket. He tossed it toward me. It landed at my feet. He left without another word. The door shut with a solid thud. I stood there, cold and confused, staring at the blanket on the floor. Why had his hand lifted toward me only to fall again? That question wasn't going away. The rough wool of the blanket still scratched against my cheek. I stood in the corridor, my shoulder pressed against the tower door's unyielding oak. I pressed my ear to the wood. It was rough and cool. I held my breath, trying to listen past the thud of my own heart. My fingers clenched the fabric of the borrowed shirt. It smelled of pine and wood smoke. His scent, boots stopped on the stone floor just outside. I didn't move a muscle. A man's voice spoke, low and respectful. "Silas, sir. A human was seen near the east wall last night." I leaned closer until my temple ached from the pressure. The guard went on. "He was asking questions at the village inn. He had a phone with a picture of a woman." My heart jumped hard against my ribs. That had to be Felix. He was looking for me. He was walking right into the danger I'd left behind. My hand flew up to cover my mouth. I bit down on my knuckle to keep silent. Silas Valker, the rival Alpha, answered. His voice was smooth and cold. "Find him. Bring him to the old mill. Tell no one, especially the Alpha." I knew that tone. It was the sound of a trap being set. I felt a sharp twist of guilt in my stomach. I had drawn Felix into this. The bond with Kalen gave a sudden, soft ache in my chest, a stupid urge to run to him for help, but I remembered his lifted hand and his rigid back. He was bound by law to protect me, but that was all. I slid down the door until I sat on the floor. The stone leached the warmth from my body. I had to find Felix first. But these walls were my prison, and my warden was the only one who could open the door. My back was pressed flat against the cold stone wall of my tower room. The sudden darkness was so complete it felt solid. I gasped, stumbling until my shoulders hit the wall. My hands slapped against the rough surface, trying to find something to hold onto. A low growl came from the doorway. Kalen was still out there. The sound was deep and not fully human. It vibrated right through the floor. My fear must have filled the space between us because his growl cut off. I felt his arm brush against mine in the pitch black. He went completely still beside me. I could hear the rough sound of his breathing. "Don't move," he snarled, but his voice caught on the words. The bond between us twisted in my chest, sharp and shared. It was pain. I heard a sharp scraping sound against the stone doorframe. He was using his claws to hold himself in place. A low, dangerous rumble started in his chest again. My heart hammered hard against my ribs. Was his beast winning? I pressed myself flat against the wall and tried not to breathe. Then his hand found my arm in the dark. His fingers were warm and they closed around my wrist. He didn't pull me. He just held on. His thumb pressed against my pulse point. He was counting my frantic heartbeats. "Ilara," he said my name. His voice was strained but clear. "3 steps to your left. A corner, move there now." He guided me with that firm grip. I went because I had no better plan. The corner was solid stone at my back. He let go of my wrist and stepped back. I could feel the space he left between us. His controlled breathing was the only sound. He had fought his wolf for me. That was why his hand had lifted toward me only to fall again before. He was trying to protect me from himself. Everything else I could deal with. Why his hand had fallen before he touched me was different. Real quick, if you're here to see if a king can fight his own nature, hit subscribe. Because that fight is just getting started. I slid down to sit on the floor. The darkness was total. Kalen Thorne was a darker shape against it. He remained standing. The sound of his breathing was the loudest thing in the room. It was a slow, forced rhythm. "The generators will kick in," he said. His voice was rough, but it was not angry. It sounded tired. I had never heard that sound from him before. He shifted his weight and then he slid down the wall too. He sat a few feet from me. His head leaned back against the stone with a soft thud. His leg was close enough that I felt the heat coming from his skin. "Why are you sitting?" I asked. The words came out quiet. "Because I am tired," he said. It was a simple, honest answer. He did not look at me. He stared up at the ceiling we could not see. I was scared. My hands were steady now, which felt worse. I stayed because I needed to know if the honorable man was real or just another trap. His hand moved beside him. His fingers brushed against a loose stone chip on the floor. He rolled it between his fingers. The small, idle motion seemed out of place on him. The warmth between us grew. It was a heavy blanket in the cold dark. I clenched my hands into fists to keep them still. He shifted his position again. His knee bumped against my shoulder. We both went very still. "Sorry," he muttered. He did not move his leg away. The contact was a line of fire through my shirt. I tucked my head against my knees. I hid my face in the fabric of my jeans. I could smell the pine and wood smoke scent of him. It filled the small space. His breathing changed. It hitched once, then smoothed out into that forced calm. He was not fighting his wolf for my safety right then. He was fighting it for his own sake, for a rule he had set for himself. The silence that followed was full of things we did not say. It was full of the almost thing his leg against my shoulder could have been. That question, why his leg stayed pressed against my shoulder, sat there like something unfinished. The red emergency lights flickered on with a loud buzz. The sudden light made me flinch. Kalen's radio crackled on his belt before he could speak. A voice, urgent and strained, said, "Alpha, east wall breach. Someone's heading for the tower." All the tension left Kalen's body in a single breath. It was replaced by a stillness that was worse. He was at the door in one fluid motion, his injury forgotten. I followed him into the hall without thinking. Silas Volker and 2 large enforcers had a figure pinned against the wall. The intruder fought like a wildcat, all sharp elbows and curses. It was Felix. My friend Felix laughed, a sharp and broken sound, even as Silas twisted his arm behind his back. Kalen stalked forward, his movements pure predatory grace. "A lone human in my territory on a full moon?" he asked, his voice low. He grabbed Felix's chin, forcing eye contact. "You have a death wish." Felix's defiance faded into real fear right in front of me. He looked very young. Then Felix's eyes found me over Kalen's shoulder. He smiled. It was slow and knowing, like he'd just solved a puzzle. My blood went cold. How did he even know I was here? Kalen caught the look. He shoved Felix toward the enforcers. Take him to the cells. But then he turned to me. He didn't speak. He just looked, and the scar on his face seemed deeper in the flickering red light. I remembered how his hand had dropped before he touched me in the dark. He was fighting himself. The bond between us gave a single, dull ache right under my ribs. I didn't know what to say. Silas stepped into the space Kalen left. He held up an old phone. This was in his pocket. A picture of me, one I'd never taken, was bright on the screen. "Your human friend came hunting," Silas said. His voice was casual, but his cold blue eyes were fixed on me. I wonder what he was promised. I pushed the thought aside. Why Felix had that picture would have to wait. The next morning, the ghost of Kalen's grip was still on my wrist like a cold brand. I walked into his office. The smell hit me first. Lemon oil and old paper, clean and sharp, nothing like the chaos of the night before. Kalen stood behind a wide oak desk. He wasn't looking at me. He was staring down at a single photograph. Then he moved. He slammed his palm on the picture and shoved it across the polished wood toward me. I forced myself to walk closer. The photo showed a figure at the edge of the woods near the castle gates. I recognized the bright blue jacket immediately. It was Felix's favorite. My stomach dropped straight through the floor. I crossed my arms tight. I held my breath. Kalen finally looked up. His golden eyes pinned me where I stood. "You know this human." It wasn't a question. I gave one short nod. My throat was too tight for words. A flicker of warmth sparked in my chest, then died, the bond, a tiny ache beneath the fear. Kalen's jaw worked. He pointed a rigid finger at the photo. "A human breach of our perimeter means expulsion for the one who brought him here." His scent turned sharp and angry, filling the quiet room. "That's you, Alara. The law is clear." I stared at the picture of my friend. I chewed the inside of my lip. Telling Kalen that Felix was just scared for me wouldn't help. It would make him a target. But lying to an alpha's face was a terrible risk. I had to say something. I had to protect Felix. The thought of him in a cell because of me was a physical pain. I couldn't let that happen. I looked from the photo to Kalen. He was waiting. His shoulders were set in a hard line. A muscle jumped in his scarred cheek. I thought of his leg pressed against my shoulder in the dark. He de-stayed like that to ground himself. He de-fought his own nature to give me space. That was the man I had to reach. I made my decision. I dropped my arms to my sides. I stepped forward until the desk was the only thing between us. I met his hard stare and didn't look away. "He is my friend," I said. My voice was steadier than I felt. "He's in danger because of me. I brought that danger here." I placed my hands flat on the cool oak. I leaned in. "You said the law demands expulsion for a breach, but there's another law, a higher one." I saw the confusion flicker in his eyes. I took a deep breath. I pushed every bit of my will into my next words. "I am claiming my mate. I am claiming you, Kalen Thorne. Your protection is mine to give, and I extend it to him." One thing kept pulling at me, though, that flicker of confusion in his eyes right before I said it. My lips still burned with the ghost of Kalen's surprised breath against them. I walked into the pack hall, the smell of pine smoke and roasted meat wrapping around my still shaking shoulders. The noise died the second we entered. Every face turned. A man with sun-bleached blonde hair and cold eyes stepped out from the crowd. Silas Volker, Kalen's rival. "Your human pet is a weakness," Silas shouted. He pointed a rigid finger at me, then spread his arms wide to the pack. "She distracts our alpha. She brings human trouble to our gates. Look at him now, wounded because of her." Kalen moved instantly. He became a solid, tense wall between Silas and me. A low growl started deep in his chest. I saw the muscle in his neck cord tight. He didn't speak. His silence was more threatening than any shout. The hall was so quiet I heard the fire crackle in the hearth. "I challenge you, Kalen," Silas declared. His voice was triumphant. "For the alpha title. Right here, right now." He ripped his shirt off. He was ready to shift and fight. The pack's collective breath hitched. This was it. My claim hadn't protected us. It had made us a target. The pack fell completely silent. Kalen had to accept or he'd lose everything. He looked at Silas, then his eyes flicked to me, just for 1 second. In that look, I saw raw, weary frustration. Was this fight about power, or was it really about me? He nodded once, a sharp and deadly motion. "The challenge is accepted. Kalen said. His voice was gravel. But the terms are mine. We fight at dawn, under the old pine. He turned his back on Silas, a complete dismissal. Then he reached for my arm. His fingers closed around my wrist, not to hurt, but to pull me through the crowd. He was claiming me in front of everyone. I had no choice but to go. The rest made sense. Why Kalen had looked at me before he accepted. That didn't. My throat was raw from shouting over the pack. The balcony's stone railing was cold and slick under my hands as I stared into the rain. The heavy door behind me opened and shut. I knew his step. Kalen came to stand beside me. He didn't speak. He just rested his own hands on the wet stone. The space between our fingers was less than an inch. He broke the silence first. His voice was rough. My office is down the hall. It's a sanctuary. We can talk there without being heard. It wasn't an offer. It was a fact. I nodded. I didn't trust my own voice. I followed him into a dim corridor and through a thick wooden door. The room was warm. A low fire cracked in the hearth. It smelled of old books and leather. He went to a cabinet and took out a small metal box. He sat in a worn chair and started to clean a shallow cut on his hand. I saw the first aid supplies on a table. I picked up a roll of bandage and handed it to him. Our fingers brushed. He flinched. His whole body went still for a second, then his shoulders slumped. The always perfect Alpha just looked tired. The firelight showed new lines around his eyes. I paused with the bandage half unwrapped. I just watched him. He kept his eyes fixed on his injured hand. I never wanted a challenge, he muttered. He sounded almost sad. He wasn't looking at me. Not like this, not with you in the middle of it. He finally glanced up. His golden eyes held mine. I saw the flicker of confusion I'd put there in the hall. Now I understood it. He hadn't expected my claim. He'd been ready for a fight. He hadn't been ready for me to choose him. We stood very close in the quiet room. The only sound was the fire and the storm outside. I felt a pull in my chest, a warm ache drawing me toward him, but I clenched my fists at my sides. What would happen if I did? He didn't move either. We were 2 points held in place by the same heavy force. Air between us was thick with everything we hadn't said, but why my hands had stopped shaking the moment he touched me? I still had no answer for that. The memory of his grip on my wrist still pulsed like a fresh bruise the next morning. I stepped into Kalen's study. The air smelled sharp, of ozone and rain-soaked stone. Silas Volker was already there. He leaned over the large oak table, a map spread between him and Kalen. His smile was wide and white. It didn't reach his cold blue eyes. A simple territorial agreement, Thorn, Silas said. His voice was smooth as a river stone. He pushed the map forward with a sun-browned hand. Your pack keeps the eastern timber. My people take the southern river access. We both get a buffer against the rogues. His eyes flicked to me where I stood behind Kalen's chair. It was quick, a measuring glance. It made my skin prickle. Kalen didn't move for a long moment. He was seated, his shoulders tense. I saw the way his fingers pressed into the polished wood. The edge dug into his palms. He needed this. I knew that from the tense set of his mouth. A fight with Silas was one thing. A war on 2 fronts was impossible. I stood silent behind his chair. Silas's scent filled the space between the bookshelves. It was wrong, like metal and burnt sugar. My omega senses screamed a warning I couldn't voice. I pressed my knuckles hard into the leather back of the chair to keep still. The way he'd looked at me just then, that wasn't the bond. I didn't know what to do with that. Finally, Kalen reached for the pen on the map. His movement was slow. He didn't look at Silas. He looked at the dotted line dividing the land. This grants passage for my hunters during the full moon run, he said, his voice low. Of course, Silas said, his smile never fading. We are allies now. Kalen's hand hovered over the signature line. I saw the faint tremor in his wrist, the only sign of the pain from his injured side. Then he set the pen tip down and signed his name with a single, heavy scratch. The sound was loud in the quiet room. He didn't trust Silas, but I saw no other choice written in the weary line of his neck. I put it away. I got on with things, but the tremor in his wrist as he signed our land away. It refused to stay put. The sting of Silas's appraising gaze still clung to my skin hours later. The warehouse door groaned, shut behind me, sealing in the smell of damp concrete and old motor oil. I walked deeper into the cavernous space. Felix was a step behind me. He adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses, a nervous habit. The silence was wrong. It was the heavy quiet of a place waiting for something to happen. I held up a hand to stop him. We both listened. There was only the distant drip of water and the hum of a single overhead light. I moved toward a side office, its door hanging open. The room inside was small, cluttered with dusty file cabinets. Felix followed me in. He immediately started checking the drawers. His movements were quick, anxious. I watched the main warehouse door instead. My own heart was beating too fast. Then I heard a soft scrape of wood behind me. Felix had found a false panel behind a metal cabinet. He pulled out several thick, leather-bound books. He opened one and started flipping pages under the weak light from a grimy window. His face went pale behind his glasses. He looked up at me, his eyes wide with a sick kind of understanding. He showed me a page. The entries were columns of dates and weights and prices, but the item listed was always pelt. My stomach tightened. This wasn't a hunting log. It was a ledger for a butcher shop. Felix slammed the book shut. The sound was too loud in the quiet room. His hands were steady now, which scared me more than if they'd shaken. He was furious. That fury had burned away his fear. A floorboard creaked right outside the office door. We were not alone. I pushed Felix back toward the wall. I put myself between him and the entrance. The door handle began to turn. I braced myself, but the door didn't open. It was kicked inward. The force splintered the frame. Two large men filled the doorway. They were Silas's enforcers. I knew it instantly from their cold eyes. The first one lunged for me. His partner went straight for Felix. He grabbed Felix by the front of his jacket and shoved him against the filing cabinets. The man's other hand went into Felix's pocket. He pulled out his phone. He held it up a trophy before tossing it to his partner. Felix struggled, but the man just leaned in closer. His face was inches from Felix's. He didn't hit him, he just held him there. A forced and terrible closeness. Felix's glasses slid crooked on his nose. I moved toward the door. And the reason he'd let them take his phone without a fight moved with me. The phantom pressure of Silas's hand on my jaw lingered, a dull ache with every step. I found myself in the hushed library. The scent of old paper and beeswax was there, but it couldn't mask the sharper, chemical tang of his cologne on my collar. I sat heavily on the wide leather couch. It faced the cold fireplace. Kalen stood at the tall window across the room. He was a dark shape against the evening glass. His hands were clasped tightly behind his back. The silence between us was a living thing. It was heavy with everything we had said, and everything we could not. "I'm a weakness they can always use," I said to the empty hearth. My voice sounded flat. I pulled my legs up onto the couch and hugged them. The leather was cool against my skin. It doesn't matter what I do. My being here is the trap. I felt the truth of it settle in my bones. He wasn't human. I had to keep reminding myself of that. The rules of his world made me a key or a pawn. I had no other value to a wolf like Silas. Kalen did not turn from the window. His reflection in the glass was unreadable. "My father always said I was a brute, not a strategist," he said. His voice was low and rough. It was not the commanding tone he used for the pack. He said I led with my teeth, not my head, that I would lose a kingdom won by cunning. He finally turned. His golden eyes found me in the dim light. There was a tiredness in them I had not seen before. He walked over and sat on the far end of the same couch. The space between us felt charged, but neither of us moved to close it. Our shoulders were not quite touching. I could see the steady rise and fall of his chest. He looked down at his own hands. They rested on his knees, palms open. I noticed a faint, rhythmic tapping of his thumb against his kneecap. It was the only movement he made. He was so still it seemed to cost him effort. I watched that small, restless motion. I thought about the tremor in his wrist when he signed our land away to Silas. This was the same man holding himself in check. The protector and the king, fighting the beast that wanted to just take. The warmth of the bond was a quiet pull in my own chest now, not an ache. It felt like a choice waiting to be made. He looked at me then. His eyes dropped to my mouth for one breath. He stood up suddenly, the moment shattered. He walked back to the window, putting the whole room between us again. The unspoken thing he almost did hung in the air, heavier than any threat. The warmth of Kalen's hand still lingered in my palm. A phantom pressure against my skin. I stepped into the cool shadow of the eastern pines. The air tasted of damp earth and pending rain. My feet made no sound on the thick moss. I moved with my head low. My eyes scanned every shift of shadow between the trees. I listened for any sound that was not the wind. My shoulder ached from the old wound, but I pushed the pain down. Felix was out there, alone because of me. I had to reach him before Silas did. A low growl rolled through the clearing ahead. Silas Volker stepped from behind a thick pine trunk. Two of his enforcers flanked him. His cold blue eyes found me in the half-light. He smiled, but it was not a kind smile. It was the smile of a man who had won a bet. "The little Omega wanders," Silas said. His voice was quiet and rough. "Going somewhere without your keeper." I froze, my heart hammered hard against my ribs. I could not run back toward Thorn territory. That would lead them right to Kalen's border. I stood my ground. I forced my voice to stay flat. "I am within my rights to walk my alpha's land." "Your alpha," Silas sneered. He took one step forward. The brass knuckles on his right hand caught a thin beam of light. "You mean the one you're so eager to escape? I saw you slip past the sentries." He lunged. His movement was a blur. I twisted away, but his claws caught my left shoulder. They ripped through my jacket and skin. White-hot pain burned down my arm. I cried out, stumbling back into a tree. The scent of my own blood filled the air. It was sharp and coppery. Silas's smile widened. He had marked me. This was not a capture. It was a claim. I turned and ran. Every step sent a fresh jolt of fire through my shoulder. My left arm was just dead weight, swinging uselessly. I could hear them behind me, crashing through the brush. But they weren't sprinting. They were pacing me, hurting me. I slammed through a wall of thorny branches. They tore at my clothes, my face. I stumbled into a small, dense thicket and fell hard to my knees. The sounds of pursuit just stopped. I listened, panting. All I could hear was my own ragged breath and the sickening throb of my wound. I'd lost them for a second. I clutched my shoulder. My hand came away slick and dark with blood. I was leaving a trail a child could follow. I looked ahead through the trees. The old mill was still so far. Could I even make it? Then I thought of Felix's face. Confused, scared. It pushed me back to my feet. That's when I heard it. A low whistle to my left, an answering one to my right. They were closing the net. My vision swam. My legs just buckled and I collapsed back into the thicket. Hidden but not safe. I heard it then, the quiet, deliberate crunch of a boot on dry leaves, coming closer. I came to on a bed of dried moss. It crunched under me. The air smelled damp and mineral, like wet earth. A low fire crackled nearby, throwing shadows on rough stone walls. Kalen Thorn was kneeling beside me. His big hands were busy with a cloth and a canteen. He was cleaning a deep cut on my side. His hands were gentle, but his jaw was clenched so tight I thought it might crack. The fire's warmth and his nearness pulled at me. It was a dangerous comfort. I flinched when the antiseptic bit into the wound. A small sound escaped me. Kalen's hands stopped moving. He looked up at me. His golden eyes weren't angry. They were wide, clear. And for 1 second, I didn't see the alpha. I didn't see the beast. I just saw a man who was afraid. All the usual anger was gone. It was like looking through a crack in a stone wall. I had no idea what was on the other side. He looked back down at the bandage in his hands. He was quiet for a long time. "I hate seeing you hurt," he said. His voice was so low, it was almost a whisper, like he hadn't meant to say it out loud. He focused on securing the gauze, but I saw it, the careful control in his fingers. They weren't quite steady. It was an answer to a question I'd never asked. It was the same raw honesty I'd heard in his voice before when he thought I wasn't listening. Our faces were close in that small den. He stopped breathing. I could feel the heat coming off his skin. I leaned in just a fraction, drawn by that warmth and the ache in my chest. Then I caught myself. I pulled back. He didn't move closer either. He just stayed there, kneeling, his hands now still on his thighs. The silence between us was thick enough to touch. Something had shifted in the air, but neither of us reached for it. Stepping into Kalen's quarters that night, the first thing that hit me was the smell. Beeswax polish, clean and unexpected. Then Kalen moved past me. His shoulder brushed mine as he walked to the heavy oak door. He didn't look at me when he spoke. "It's for your safety," he said. His voice was flat. He pulled the door shut from the outside. I heard the solid chunk of a key turning in the lock. I rushed to the window. My fingers gripped the cold iron bars set deep into the stone. They didn't budge. And that's when it hit me. A sharp, sick pain stabbing deep behind my breastbone. It wasn't my pain. It was the bond, screaming that Felix was in real danger. Right now. I clutched my chest, gasping for air. The polished floorboards creaked under my frantic pacing. The room was a beautiful cage. A fire crackled in the hearth, but its warmth felt like a mockery. I stopped, my eyes fixed on the stone fireplace. One river rock near the base was a different, darker color than the others. I dropped to my knees. I dug my fingernails into the gritty mortar around that stone. I worked at it until my fingertips were raw and bleeding. The stone gave way with a gritty scrape. A narrow, black hole gaped behind it. Cool, damp air whispered out. It smelled of wet earth and old stone. I didn't know if it led outside. I knew I had to try. I looked back at the locked door. I thought of Kalen's voice, that moment in the den. This felt like a betrayal of the trust we'd just built, but the ache for Felix was louder. I squeezed my shoulders into the tight opening. The rough stone scraped my back. I crawled forward into the absolute dark. The space was so narrow I had to turn my head sideways to breathe, and then I heard it. A low whistle cut through the silence ahead. The same two-note call I'd heard in the woods, meant for my ears alone. It was Felix's signal. He was close. I pushed forward with new strength, leaving the locked room and the scent of beeswax far behind me. I stepped into the mill's cavernous gloom. My boots crunched on a brittle layer of rotted grain husks. Silas Volker stood ahead of me. He smiled, but his pale blue eyes were cold. "Welcome," he said. "I see you found our little nest." "My friend," I said, my voice was tight. "Where is Felix Crow?" Silas gestured with his head to the side. In a rusted metal cage, Felix sat slumped. His glasses were gone. He saw me and tried to stand. One of Silas's men, a huge enforcer, shoved him back down. I was scared. My whole body went still and cold. My heart was beating so hard I could feel it in my ears. Silas leaned in close. His breath smelled like strong mint. "I won't free him," he said, his voice low. "That was never the plan." "He has nothing to do with this," I said. "He has everything to do with it." Silas stepped back and spread his hands. "He is the leash. You are the prize. A pure Omega will fetch a high price from certain collectors. Felix stays here, alive and well, for as long as you behave for your new owner." He glanced at the cage. "One wrong move from you and my men get bored. They will find uses for him." My heart pounded against my ribs. I wanted to scream. I wanted to launch myself at him, but Felix needed me to be smart. I took a shaky breath. The air was thick with mold and rust. I made my hands unclench at my sides. "Kalen will come for me," I said. "You know that." Silas laughed. It was a short, sharp sound. "Let him come. He'll be walking into a business transaction, not a fight. His claim ends the moment I hand you over. The law is clear." He reached out and tucked a strand of my hair behind my ear. His fingers were dry and rough. I forced myself not to flinch. He hadn't chosen me. Something else had put us here. There was a difference. I looked at his satisfied face. I looked at Felix, who was staring at me with pure terror. I couldn't save us both by fighting. I straightened my shoulders and met Silas's gaze. "I want to see the terms," I said. "I want proof Felix stays unharmed." "Smart girl," Silas said. He nodded to his enforcer. The man dragged Felix from the cage and pulled him toward a dark doorway. Felix struggled, his eyes locked on mine. "Elara," he shouted. Then they were gone. The silence they left behind was worse. I was trapped. Across the shadowed floor, I saw movement in other cages. Other faces, gaunt and hopeless, watched me from behind bars. They were other wolves. The cold press of the cage bars throbbed against my cheekbone. Outside, the damp chill seeped through the mill's broken wall. It carried the sharp scent of pine that clashed with the rot inside. This was what Silas wanted for me, for Felix. I felt a pull in my chest then, a sharp ache that wasn't my own. It was a frantic, pounding signal. Kalen was close. He was coming, and he was not careful. A guard outside my cage grunted and turned his head. Then his body went stiff. He fell without a sound into the wet ferns. Kalen stepped over him. Moonlight caught the side of his face. His dark hair was wild. His eyes were pure, burning gold. He was a shadow that killed other shadows. He moved past my line of sight. I heard another choked gasp from the far side of the clearing, then another. He was working his way around the perimeter. He was taking them all down. I pressed my face to the bars, trying to see him. The bond in my chest tightened from a scream to a low, focused hum. It felt like a wire pulled taut. I heard a soft crunch of gravel to my left. Kalen was there. He had a set of heavy keys in his hand. His knuckles were split and bleeding. He didn't look at me. He looked at the lock. His breath came in short, controlled puffs of steam in the cold air. He was holding himself together by a thread. He forced a key into the lock. His hand covered mine on the bar for a second. His skin was hot. It was a claim, quiet and absolute. The lock clicked open. He pulled the cage door wide. "Felix is in the walls," I said fast. He was signaling, the old chutes for the grain. Kalen gave a single, sharp nod. He understood. He didn't ask how I knew. He just turned and put his body between me and the dark doorway of the mill, a low growl built in his chest. It wasn't the mindless rage of his beast. It was a promise. It was a command for me to stay behind him. We moved toward the broken wall. The bond between us was a silent, forced coordination. I had no choice but to follow his lead. The metallic taste of adrenaline coated my tongue as I forced myself to swallow. My boots hit the mill's main floor, and a deafening groan of ancient timber filled the space around me. Silas Volker lunged at Kalen from behind a stack of rotting pallets. I saw Kalen turn to meet him with a snarl. My ribs screamed as I ran toward the row of cages. Felix was inside the first one. His glasses were cracked. A big iron key hung on a hook across the room. A heavy chain swung loose from the ceiling and I ducked under it. My hands scraped across the gritty floor as I scrambled toward the wall. I grabbed the cold key and ran back to Felix's cage. "Hold on," I said. My hands shook so bad the key clanged against the metal. Kalen and Silas crashed through a thin wall into a side room. Dust and splinters filled the air. Felix's eyes went wide. He looked past me and shouted my name. I turned. Silas, his blonde hair full of plaster, shoved a fallen beam off himself. He ignored Kalen, who was getting up behind him. Silas looked right at me. His blue eyes were flat and cold. He ran straight for me, his hand curled into a killing claw. I froze. I saw the sharp points of his claws aimed right at my chest. I saw the pure focus on his face. He didn't see me as a person. I was a thing to be taken. I couldn't move, then a shadow crossed his face. Kalen leaped between us. He shoved me aside so hard I fell against Felix's cage. Silas's claws sank deep into Kalen's shoulder with a terrible, wet sound. Kalen didn't cry out. He just grunted, a short, pained breath. He wrapped his arms around Silas and drove him back into the wall. The way he'd looked at me just then. It wasn't the bond. I didn't know what to do with that. Silas threw Kalen off and bolted for a broken window. Kalen stumbled and fell to one knee. Dark blood soaked his shirt instantly. I was at his side before I decided to move. I pressed my hands against the hot, torn fabric of his shoulder. The bond was a raw, open wound in my chest. I could feel his pain as a sharp pull behind my ribs. "Don't you die," I said. My voice was rough. I looked up at Felix, who was finally crawling out of the cage. His face was white with terror. He looked at me holding Kalen, at the blood on my hands, and he took a step back. He was afraid of me. I understood why now. I kept my hands pressed on Kalen's wound. The slick heat of Kalen's blood still coated my hands. I stood on a rocky outcrop overlooking the borderlands. The only sound was the dry rattle of thorn bushes in the wind. Kalen stood beside me. His breathing was a shallow, controlled rhythm I felt in my own chest. He was pale under his dark stubble. The bandage I'd made from my shirt showed a dark bloom of red. He moved with a rigid focus that hid how badly he was hurt. Silas Volker stepped from the shadow of a twisted pine. Two of his enforcers flanked him. "Thorn," Silas said. His voice was flat. "You're bleeding on my land. That's a declaration." Kalen didn't look at me. He kept his eyes on Silas. "Your men took something of mine from a neutral mill. I'm just collecting it." His tone was all cold alpha, but I saw the fine tremor in the hand he held at his side. "Your claim died with your strength," Silas said. He nodded at Kalen's side. "You can barely stand. Give me the girl and crawl back to your den. I might let your pack live." Kalen's lips pulled back from his teeth. The air went sharp. Then he moved. He didn't go for Silas. He lunged at the guard on the left with a raw, pained sound. His fist connected with a crack. The man went down. The other guard jumped in, and Silas roared. Suddenly, it was a tangle of bodies and snarls right in front of me. Kalen took a hard hit to his wounded side. He grunted but grabbed the attacker's arm. He twisted it until the bones snapped. He looked over the man's shoulder straight at me. His golden eyes were bright with pain and a fierce, clear command. He wanted me to go. I went. I turned and ran into the compound behind us, toward the old shed we'd scouted. The sounds of the fight grew fainter. I forced myself not to look back. I knew what he'd done. He'd broken a direct alpha command on another's territory. He'd given me the opening, but he'd also given Silas every right to kill him and then come for his whole pack. The intimacy of that sacrifice was a cold stone in my throat. The cold knot of dread in my stomach stayed tight. I slipped through the compound service door into the holding facility. The sharp, sterile scent of industrial cleaner immediately clawed at my throat. The hallway was a long, white tunnel lit by harsh fluorescent bars. My sneakers squeaked on the polished floor. At the end was a heavy door with a small, thick window. I looked through it. My breath fogged the glass. The room beyond was a warehouse of suffering. Rows of metal-framed cots stood in perfect lines under the bright lights. On each cot lay a person. Some were men, some were women. They all stared at the ceiling. Their eyes were open, but they did not blink. A low hum came from a bank of machines along the far wall. Thin tubes ran from the machines to needles in the arms of the still forms. I covered my mouth with my hand. My fingers were cold against my lips. This was not a prison. This was a factory. I pushed the door open. The air inside was warm and smelled of artificial flowers and something chemical. I walked down the first aisle, my heart hammering against my ribs. I found Felix on the third cot in the second row. My friend Felix lay on his back, his wire-rimmed glasses folded neatly on a small shelf beside him. His sandy hair was matted with sweat. I put my hand on his shoulder and shook him gently. His skin was warm and damp through his jacket. His eyes were open, but glassy. They did not move to look at me. "Felix," I said. My voice was too loud in the quiet room. He did not respond. I leaned closer. "Felix, it's me. We have to go." His chest rose and fell in a steady, slow rhythm. He was breathing, but he was not here. A terrible understanding settled over me. This was why he had looked at me with terror before he ran. He had seen this place. He had seen what they did here. I let go of Felix and ran to the far wall. The control panel was just a flat rectangle of metal, covered in blinking lights. I needed to open those cell doors. I didn't see a key. I didn't see a switch. But there was a loose piece of metal conduit pipe leaning against the wall. I picked it up. It was cold and heavy. I swung it at the panel. The impact jarred my arms. Sparks flew out with a sharp crackle. And then every single cell door along the walls released at once. The sound was deafening, a solid clang that echoed through the whole room. I dropped the pipe and turned around, expecting movement, expecting chaos. Nothing happened. The Omegas didn't move. They didn't sit up. They didn't even turn their heads toward the noise. I went back to Felix. I pulled at his arm, trying to lift him. His body was just a dead weight. He made a soft, confused sound, but his limbs were limp. I looked down the endless rows of cots. Dozens of people, all trapped inside their own minds, all waiting to be drained. I couldn't carry them all. I couldn't even wake one up. The scale of it crushed my first wave of horror into something harder, something sharper. I had to find the place they controlled this from. I had to turn the whole thing off. The ghost of Felix's grip was still deep in the bones of my hand. My back found a cold metal shelving unit in a disused room. It was dusty. Place smelled like old machine oil. Kalen stood across from me. He leaned his shoulder against the doorframe, breathing hard, his eyes closed. I wrapped my arms around myself. The warmth of the mate bond was just a low hum in my chest, a quiet insistence. After a minute, his breathing slowed. He opened his eyes. They were just brown again. He pushed off the doorframe and took a step into the room. He started to run a hand through his hair but stopped halfway. His fingers curled into his palm instead. He held it there for a second too long. Then he let his hand drop to his side. I saw the tremor in it before it fell. He didn't try to hide it this time. I didn't know what to do with that, so I said the first practical thing I could think of. "What's our next move?" He looked at the floor between us. "We find the main power grid, we cripple the cages. And after that, we get your friend, we get the others, we get out." His voice was low, there was no command in it. "Tell me the real cost," I said. "You broke an Alpha's command out there. For me, what does that mean?" He was quiet for a long time. The only sound was our breathing. When he finally spoke, his words were raw. "It means Silas has every right to call for my blood now, and the Pax, I gave him that." He lifted his head. He looked straight at me. "Back in the hall, I looked at you before I gave that order. I needed to see you were clear. I needed to know you would run." "I didn't run," I said. "I know." His voice dropped to a whisper. "It's the only thing that matters, and it's the thing that terrifies me, because my next move has to be worse. To fix this, I have to be more of a beast, and I'm scared that beast will be the one you see. I'm scared it's the one you'll get." He took a step closer. I could see the exhaustion around his eyes. I could feel the warmth from his body in the cold air. I reached out. My fingers moved toward his hand, the one that had trembled. They stopped just short of touching his skin. The space between our hands felt heavy. Full. I pulled my hand back to my side. He didn't move, he just watched me. Something had shifted in the dusty air between us. Neither of us gave it a name. The tightness in my chest hadn't eased. Kalen and I stepped into the mill's central control room. The air immediately tasted like ozone and hot metal. The place was a mess of old machines and new computers, and there was Silas Volker. He stood beside the main console, holding Felix against him with a knife at his side. Felix's glasses were crooked, his face was white. "You took your time," Silas said. His voice was too calm. "I knew you'd follow the blood trail straight to me. It's almost too easy." My eyes found the knife on a nearby panel, just where Kalen said it would be. I forced myself to look at Felix instead. Let him go. He doesn't belong in this. He belongs exactly where I put him, Silas said. He shifted his grip, making Felix gasp. You're the asset, Alara. An unbonded Omega is a power source. This whole network runs on latent energy like yours. I just need to tap it. Way he looked at me then, it wasn't just about the threat, it was a hungry look, like he was measuring me for a socket. I saw the main power grid schematic on a screen behind him. I remembered a junction box I'd passed, its cover loose, a weakness. Kalen's shoulder brushed mine. I felt the fine tremor in his arm, not from fear, from the effort of holding his wolf back. You can't force a bond, I said, my voice flat. I don't need the bond, I just need the raw material, Silas said. He smiled. Submission will do. I moved then. I didn't go for the knife. I lunged for the secondary control panel to my left. I slammed my palm down on a series of overload toggles I'd seen in the ledgers. Lights flickered violently across the room. A bank of monitors went dark with a loud pop. Silas flinched. In that second, Kalen moved, but Silas was faster. He yanked Felix back and shifted the knife. The flat, cold edge pressed against the bare skin of Felix's throat. The reason I'd gone for the overload toggles instead of my knife hit me in that storage room. I'd been wrong to ignore it this long. My back hit the dusty crates. The only light was this sickly green glow from an exit sign. Kalen shut the door, and the noise from the control room just stopped. It was just my heartbeat pounding in my ears. He stood there, breathing hard from the fight. He looked at the closed door for a long time, then I saw it. His shoulders dropped just a fraction. He ran a hand through his hair and left it pressed against his temple. He wasn't the Alpha King in here. He was just a man, and we were out of options. He has Felix, Kalen said. His voice was rough but quiet. I know, I said. My throat hurt. I was so scared for Felix, I had to press my hands flat against the crate to keep them still. My distraction failed. He moved too fast. Kalen took a step toward me. The green light cut across his face. I could send the pack in. It would be a bloodbath. Silas would kill Felix first. He said it like he was talking about the rain. Or I go in alone. Challenge him, that's what he wants. A show for the captives to see. Then he wins, I said. The words felt solid. If you die in a challenge, his claim is legitimate. He gets everything. I pushed off from the crate. There were only a few feet between us. There has to be another way. I have to be part of it. He was quiet. I watched his chest rise and fall. Then his hand fell from his temple. He looked at his palm like he was surprised to find it empty. I told you to run, he said. It wasn't an accusation. He just sounded tired. When I gave the command to breach. I told you to run, and you didn't. You broke your own command for me, I said. I took another step. The air felt thick. You let me see the map. You showed me the weakness in the grid. My voice got quieter. I pulled my hand back in the hall because I saw your fear. I saw you holding your breath. I went for the toggles instead of a knife because you trusted me with the plan. I will not run now. Kalen closed the last of the distance. He didn't touch me. He stood so close I could feel the heat from his body. He searched my face. His golden eyes were so bright in the dim light. He gave a single, slow nod. Then we do it your way, he said. I will face him. I will make him look at me. You will do what you do best. You will slip through the cracks he does not see. He lifted his hand. For a second, I thought he'd touch my face. His fingers stopped just before they met my skin. He let his hand fall back to his side. The unspoken thing in the room was so heavy I could barely breathe. I pushed the thought away and got on with it, but what was between us refused to stay put. Kalen's nod still sat like a stone in my throat as I pushed the heavy door open. Hot, oily air hit me on the catwalk. The machines below whined like they were in pain. I saw the main panel. Silas stood in front of it. He had Felix locked in front of him, a knife at his throat. Kalen was frozen 10 feet away. His eyes were fixed on the blade. A muscle in his neck jumped. It was the only thing moving on him. One more step, Thorn, Silas rasped over the noise. Your human dies, then I take what's mine anyway. He meant me. I felt it like a cold draft. Kalen didn't look at me. He kept his whole attention on Silas, but his left hand opened and closed at his side. He hadn't chosen me, the bond had. There was a difference. That difference was a man forcing himself to be still when his whole being wanted to tear the world apart. Name your price, Kalen said. His voice was flat. It was his pack judgment tone. The girl walks to me, Silas said, And you renounce the neutral zone in front of him. He jerked his head toward Felix. A human witness has a certain charm. I saw Kalen's shoulders tighten. The cost wasn't just land, it was a public admission of weakness. It would invite every other challenger. He paused too long. His eyes dropped to the floor for a single second. Then they came back up hard. I didn't know what that drop meant. I held my breath. "Do it, Alara," Kalen said, not turning. "Get to the panel." It wasn't the command I expected. He was sticking to our plan. He was trusting me with the real victory while he paid the cost. He looked at Silas. "The neutral territory is yours. I renounce the Blackwood claim." Silas smiled. It was a thin, ugly stretch of his lips. He shoved Felix forward. Felix stumbled and fell to his knees. In that second of movement, I lunged. My fingers found the main overload switch. I threw it. A loud pop echoed through the room. Every light on the panel died at once. The whirring machinery ground into a sudden, deafening silence. In the quiet, Silas roared. But what Kalen had said under his breath when he thought I wasn't listening, I still had no answer for that. My knuckles still ached from gripping the control room railing. The infirmary was cold and quiet. I stood in the doorway and just watched Kalen sleep. The only sound was the slow beep of the monitor. I turned away. I had spread the digital records from Silas's phone on a small table. Felix sat in a chair nearby. His glasses were smudged. He looked pale. My hands were steady now. I sorted through the files on the tablet. It was a mess of codes and encrypted folders. I opened a ledger marked deliveries. Felix leaned in to look. He winced and pressed a hand to his bandaged ribs. "Look at this," I said. I pointed to a column of timestamps. "These match the dates your patrols went missing." "But the destination codes aren't other territories." I zoomed in. "They're shipping docks, private airfields." Felix adjusted his glasses. He squinted at the screen. "He wasn't just taking territory," Felix said. His voice was thin. "He was selling them." I scrolled further. I found the payment confirmations. Huge sums of money, all routed through shell companies. One company name kept appearing. I knew that name. It belonged to an Alpha 3 territories over, a wolf known for being brutal. I felt a cold relief settle in my stomach. This wasn't just leverage. This was a weapon. "This is enough to make every pack turn on him," I said. I looked from the screen to Felix. His loyalty had brought him here. Into this sterile room that smelled like bleach. I'd drawn him into this world. A world where trust was forced by biology or broken by violence. I put my hand over his on the tabletop. A silent apology for a choice he never got to make. Then I pushed it aside. Why my hand was still covering his? That would come back later. My jaw still ached from holding my face neutral. The heavy scent of leather greeted me as I stepped into Kalen's private quarters. I stood just inside the door. Kalen stood by the cold fireplace. He didn't turn around. The only sound was a slow drip from the bathroom faucet. We were alone. His world had rules I didn't understand. The silence between us felt thick. He finally moved. He walked to the wide oak table and leaned his palms on it. His head was bowed. I saw the careful way he held his injured side. He didn't look at me. I crossed the room. I stood beside him at the table. My hands felt awkward. I placed one on the dark wood near his. The space between our fingers felt huge and tiny. "I can still feel his hand on my neck," I said. My voice was too loud. Kalen's breath hitched. A sharp, sudden sound. He didn't look up. "I know." His voice was low. "Scraped raw. I keep seeing the knife at Felix's throat. I keep seeing you step in front of it." He turned his head then. His golden eyes were dark with a pain that had nothing to do with his wounds. "I gave up territory for him. I would have given up my title for you." I had no breath. His admission just hung there. It wasn't a boast. It was a terrible, vulnerable truth. My fingers moved without my permission. They slid over the cool wood until the side of my hand touched the side of his. I didn't take his hand. I just covered it. The contact was a quiet shock. His skin was warm. He went completely still. He looked down at our hands. He didn't pull away. He didn't turn his hand to grasp mine. He just let my hand rest on top of his. The weight of everything we'd nearly lost pressed down on that single point of contact. I could feel the steady beat of his pulse under my palm. He was staring at our joined hands like they were the only thing in the world. The drip of the faucet counted the seconds. I thought he might speak. I thought he might finally turn. He did neither. He just stayed there, perfectly motionless, letting me hold him in that silent, fragile way, whatever came next. Why his hand didn't move to hold mine back was the part I hadn't figured out. The phantom pressure of his hands still tingled on my skin as I walked. The castle's main hall hit me with a wall of noise. 100 conversations buzzing against the stone. The entire Thorn pack was there. They stood in a wide half-circle. They expected their alpha to stand alone before the hearth. I walked to Kaelin's side and stopped. The noise died into a thick silence. I felt every pair of eyes on me. The air smelled of wood smoke and wet wool. Kaelin didn't look at me. He stared out at the crowd. His shoulders were set in a hard line, then his hand found mine. His fingers were warm and rough. He laced them through mine and lifted our joined hands between us. It was a simple gesture. It felt like a claim made in front of a jury. "This pack will not be led by one voice anymore," Kaelin said. His voice carried over the silent hall. A low rumble of unease followed his words. A man near the front stepped forward. Silas Volker, a senior pack elder with iron-gray hair. He frowned deeply. "This is not our way," Silas said. He crossed his arms. "A pack needs one clear leader. It does not need a committee. This will cause confusion." Kaelin looked at me then. His eyes were a pale, steady gold. He looked back at the crowd. He looked at our linked hands for a long moment. I saw the muscle in his neck tighten. He was holding something back. Our old way nearly got us all killed. It cost us territory. It cost us honor. Do we cling to a tradition that breaks us? Or do we choose to survive? We choose to survive together. He waited. The silence stretched. And I knew I had to speak. My throat was dry. I looked at the faces watching us, waiting for a weakness. "My first command as co-leader," I said. My voice was clearer than I felt. "We will convene a council. We will rewrite our laws. The first meeting is at dusk." I moved toward the door, but the memory of what Alara had said under his breath moved with me. He'd thought I wasn't listening back in the tower room. He looked at the wall, his voice so low I almost missed it. "The bond is a cage," he'd said, "for both of us." And here's where it gets crazy. Because as I walked away from that silent hall, Kaelin's hand still warm in mine, I finally understood his hesitation. It wasn't about power. It wasn't about the pack. It wasn't even about me. It was about the cage. And the fact that he was holding the key to mine and I was holding the key to his. So, real quick, if you're here for the story of two people learning to rule a broken kingdom without breaking each other, hit subscribe. You're going to want to hear how this ends. We walked out of the hall together. The heavy doors closed behind us, cutting off the murmur of the pack. The stone corridor was cold and quiet. Kaelin dropped my hand. He didn't look at me, he just started walking, his boots echoing. I fell into step beside him. Neither of us spoke for a long time. We just walked through the empty castle, past tapestries and cold fireplaces. Then he stopped. We were in a narrow hallway with a single high window. The gray storm light fell across his face. "I meant what I said," he said. His voice was quiet, about the cage. "I know," I said. He looked at me then, really looked. His eyes weren't glowing, just a tired, pale gold. "Then you know why this is a bad idea. Surviving is a bad idea." "Surviving like this," he said. He rubbed a hand over his face. "Bound to someone you don't trust, bound to someone who doesn't trust you, it's a slow death. The 50% mark is where everything changed." Because I looked at him, this scarred king in a cold hallway, and I said the only true thing I knew. "I trust you to hate this bond as much as I do," I said. "I trust you to fight it. That's a start." He stared at me. For a second I thought he'd argue or walk away. Instead, he let out a short, rough breath, almost a laugh. "A start," he repeated. He shook his head. "Fine." He turned and kept walking. I followed, and that was it. No grand declaration, no moment of understanding, just an agreement to be miserable together, to lead a pack together, to try. The first council meeting was at dusk, just like I'd said. We sat at a long oak table in a room that smelled of old books and dust. Silas Volker was there, a few other elders, a couple of younger warriors who'd spoken up for change. Kaelin sat at the head of the table. I sat at the other end. The distance between us felt like a mile. Silas spoke first. "The law says the alpha leads. Alone, his mate supports this. Sharing of command, it has no precedent." "Then we make one," I said. Kaelin leaned back in his chair. He didn't look at me, he looked at Silas. "The precedent is that we're still here," he said. "The wolves to the east aren't. They're alpha led alone, right into a trap." Silas frowned. "And if you disagree, what then? Who breaks the tie?" Kaelin's eyes finally flicked to mine, held for a second. "We talk," he said simply. "We figure it out." The meeting went on for hours, arguing over patrol routes. over hunting grounds, over everything. Every time there was a split, Kaylin and I would look at each other from across that long table, and we'd talk. Sometimes we agreed, sometimes we didn't. When we didn't, we'd find a third way, a compromise. It was exhausting, it was slow. But by the end of that first night, we had a new patrol schedule, one that kept our borders safe without stretching the pack thin. Silas stood up to leave. He looked from Kaylin to me and back again. He didn't smile, but he gave a single slow nod. "It is functional," he said. Then he left. The others filed out after him. Soon it was just Kaylin and me in the room. The fire in the hearth had burned low. He didn't move from his chair. I didn't move from mine. The bond between us felt like a live wire, a constant, low hum of awareness, of his pine and smoke scent, of the weight of his silence. "This is going to be hard," I said. My voice sounded loud in the quiet room. He looked at the dying fire. "Yes. Are you going to throw me out into a storm again?" A corner of his mouth twitched, just once. "Not tonight." It wasn't much, but it was something. I stood up. My legs were stiff from sitting. "I'll see you tomorrow then." He nodded, still looking at the fire. I walked to the door. My hand was on the iron handle when he spoke. "Your room in the tower," he said. His voice was low. "It's the warmest one. The shutters are fixed." I paused. I didn't turn around. "Thank you." I opened the door and left him there in the dark. The next few weeks passed like that. Meetings, compromises, small, grudging acts of, not kindness, necessity. He made sure I had proper winter clothes. I pointed out a weak spot in the western wall his scouts had missed. We didn't touch. We barely looked at each other outside of council. But the pack was starting to come together. The confusion Silas had warned about, it was there. But so was a new kind of strength. We were covering each other's blind spots. And then, 70% in, we hit the real test. A scout came running in one evening, covered in mud. "The river pack," he gasped. "They've crossed the border. They're taking the old mill." The old mill was a key point. It controlled a fresh water source. Losing it would hurt us. Badly, the war room erupted. Shouts, plans for a full attack, for a show of force. Kaylin slammed a hand on the table. The room went silent. He looked at me. "What's your read?" Everyone turned to stare at me. I thought about it. The river pack was bigger, but they were spread thin. They were greedy. "They took the mill because it was easy," I said. "They're testing us. If we send our whole force, we leave the north border open. They'll hit us there next." Kaylin was already nodding. "A small, fast group," he said. "Take back the mill by surprise, not to hold it, to destroy the grinding stone, make it worthless to them. While the main force shows strength on the north ridge," I finished. "A warning." It was the first real plan we'd built together, word by word, in front of everyone. Silas looked between us. He didn't look happy, but he didn't argue. Kaylin stood up. "You'll lead the group to the mill," he said to me. It wasn't a question. I felt every eye in the room on me. I just nodded. "All right." He'd be leading the main force to the north ridge. We'd be apart for the first time since the bond snapped into place. The phantom pressure around my wrist pulsed, a shackle of unwanted warmth. He felt it too. I saw his hand flex at his side, but he just looked at me, his face a mask of stone. "Don't get killed," he said. "You either," I said back, and that was it. We went to war, leading that small group to the mill. It was the first time I felt like myself since I'd stumbled into that storm. The cold air, the quiet crunch of snow underfoot, the focus. We took the mill back just before dawn. It was fast, it was messy. We smashed the grinding stone like he said. As the gray light broke, I stood in the ruined mill, the smell of grain dust and river water in the air, and I felt it. A sharp, sudden pull in my chest, a warmth that wasn't mine. Kaylin, it wasn't pain, it was a signal, a silent shout across the miles. I knew right then that he was alive, that his part of the plan had worked, and I knew he felt the same about me. The bond wasn't a cage in that moment, it was a thread. Thin, fragile. But there, we returned to the castle as the sun was coming up. The main force was already back, filtering into the courtyard. They looked tired but whole. I saw Kaylin across the crowded yard. He was handing off his sword to an armorer. He looked up, our eyes met. He finished what he was doing. Then he started walking toward me. The pack members between us moved aside. A path cleared without a word. He stopped in front of me. His clothes were dusty. There was a shallow cut on his cheek. He searched my face, his eyes scanning for injuries. "You're all right," he said. It was flat, a statement. "I'm all right," I echoed. He nodded. He looked like he wanted to say something else. His jaw worked, but he didn't. He just turned and walked toward the keep, expecting me to follow, and I did. So, what do you think happens when two people bound against there will have to rebuild a kingdom? Can a cage become a home, or does it just get easier to ignore the bars? Let me know in the comments. And if you want to find out what happens when the next storm hits, hit that subscribe button. I promise it's worth sticking around for.